I want to welcome everyone today. My name is Kara Feeney, and I'm the Director of Exhibitions here at the Evanston Art Center. We're excited to have you all with us here today. A couple housekeeping rules. So please stay on mute while Joanna is speaking. Mute can be found at the bottom of the toolbar on the far left side. It looks like a little mic. So just make sure you stay on mute while Joanna is here giving her presentation. We will have a Q&A at the end of the session. So anytime, just type your questions into the chat function. You can also find that at the bottom of the toolbar as well. And we'll leave about 15 minutes at the end of the program to answer any questions. One more thing, we are recording this and we will post it on our website after the program. So if you have to leave early or anything like that, you can see the whole program. And now I would like to introduce Paula Dana, our president and CEO, who will then introduce Joanna.
Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have this amazing show. It's such an honor to have Joanna Pinsky in this beautiful gallery. The light is streaming through, and it's just, I hope you all get to come and see the show in person because it is amazing. So Joanna Pinsky, who probably to all of you doesn't need an introduction, but she's a painter residing in Evanston, Illinois. Working with acrylics, she creates two-dimensional shaped paintings on canvas and gatorboard, as well as rectangular works of art. She works with shapes to suggest a dynamic presence that gives a greater sense of reality to the objects. Although flat, the objects are painted to give the illusion of depth. Her paintings include images of architectural fragments and 19th century heroes, including Cuban Jose Marti, Abraham Lincoln, and more. Selected solo shows include Space 900 Gallery in Evanston, Perimeter Gallery, and Nancy Lurie Gallery in Chicago, and the Keyline Museum of Oakton Community College in Des Plaines, Illinois. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally in group shows in Hanover, Germany, Osaka, Japan, the State of Illinois Building in Chicago, the Illinois State Museum in Springfield, and the Ukrainian Art Institute in Chicago, and many more. Pinsky is a co-founder and artistic director of Art Encounter, a 41-year-old nonprofit education organization dedicated to educating, empowering, and connecting people of diverse ages and backgrounds through interactive encounters with visual art. It is a great pleasure to introduce Joanna to all of you, and thank you again for attending.
Thank you, Paula and Kara. It is really an honor to have the exhibit at the Evanston Art Center. We have a PowerPoint presentation because I'm obviously in my studio, and you can see the wall behind Kara. And we will begin with a different shot of that wall. So if we can have the first slide. I like working, I like creating these installations. They're made from individual pieces, so all of the paintings on this wall are really unique, unique works of art, and they can stand on their own. But for me, it's really fun to use them as sort of to use the wall as a canvas and really create a painting out of the paintings. That's one way of thinking about them. I like the idea of using shapes because they do have a different kind of reality. And when I place them on the wall, I'm thinking of what they really symbolize is dreams, or when you're falling asleep at night and different visions come in, particularly if you traveled or had some new experience that day. And whatever you're thinking about, a building, an architectural image that you remember may call to mind other images, and these will float through your mind. And so I like to have these non-grounded, as those images are. And there's really another reason as well, and that is that we are living, maybe I'm just getting older, and so time seems to be moving faster and faster. And memories, even during the day, and images seem to change. In a way, time feels speeded up and less fixed. So that if you're in the, if you're at the center and you're looking at this wall, the images will come in and out, sort of physically. And I like to organize the images so that some parts are sort of small and then they float back into space. Let's have the next image. So we're going to focus in on one of the individual pieces with the next slide. And this is sort of an architectural fragment, and I just like the shape. One of the things that I like to do with the wall is to have you look up at a piece. So this one you're looking up at, but on the wall it's actually below your vision, and that's part of what creates the floating sensation. So just above this piece is part of the Abraham Lincoln image that we're going to see next. But I also wanted to, a major part of what I do is color. I love color. I see by color. I organize the world by color. My earliest memories are all color. And I layer it, and then, so under this particular piece, there's lots of greens and blues, and then I've come over it with purples and pinks and other colors and scrape through. So that's sort of what you're seeing, a scratching through. Let's look at the next one. Here's Abe. I became interested in a particular 19th century hero who was Jose Marti. For Art Encounter, I led 14 trips to Cuba between 2000 and 2015, and there are statues of him all over, busts. I started photographing them, and at the same time, I was painting a lot of architectural fragments. But I really enjoy giving him different personalities. He's the big, very important hero, but usually presented in a kind of bland way. So I impose different emotions through the painting. And then I had a big show focusing on my Cuba work at the Cone Line Museum at Oakton Community College. And afterwards, I thought, what's next? I should come back home. How about Abe? Abraham Lincoln fit in very much to that same period. Lincoln died in, as we know, in 1865, and Marti in 1895. So there was a difference. But Lincoln was the one hero I could think of who had the philosophy and the poetry in essence. And so I started making a series of Lincolns. This one is actually from the Lincoln Memorial in DC. I grew up in Washington and saw this frequently. But this Lincoln has sort of orange eyes, and he's kind of looking at us. I hung him at the top of the wall on the left, and he's looking down at us, and I see him really looking into the future. Remember, I did this during the Trump era. And he's looking into the future and with great worry. So can we have the next slide, Kara? So now we're moving from left to right a little bit along this wall. And here are some of the smaller objects. And again, they're flat, but you can see the illusion of how they move in and out of space. When I'm creating these pieces, on creating the wall particularly, I like to have these little pieces. I can hang them in different ways and kind of fill a space and move them around. So I look at them as very playful objects. Another thing, I like to show images that you're familiar with, as well as images that say, well, I don't know what that thing at the top is in the orange. And that was a fragment that I saw in a museum. I think it was part of a column. I don't remember. I just liked the shape. Now, why these weird colors? I love color. And I feel that over time, color also symbolizes how we see things, our own views. I don't know quite how to express that. But color isn't, I see it as symbolic. It brings different feelings. And so I looked at that piece and I wanted to play, in that case, with the orange and blue, which are complementary colors, and it creates a nice sensation. The one at the bottom is from a fragment of an oil lamp. And it looks sort of like, I don't know, a fish or something. I just felt like blue for that piece. The next slide, please. So this piece is really at the foot of the Lincoln, not the Lincoln that's literally above it in the show, but the Lincoln in Grand Park. There are two of these. And I just thought they were interesting. I liked the tension. And then Ellen Wright suggested that it was a cannonball. And I thought, hey, it probably is. That's appropriate. Two cannonballs decorating the base of the Lincoln in Grant Park. But I really wanted the sense of tension, that the ball's kind of falling off of the other shape. So the next image. This is a young Abraham Lincoln. He is in a park. He's in Sen Park in Chicago. And there's just a wonderful statue. Literally, the statue was created by a man whose last name was Keck. And he was a sculptor in New York. And I don't know when the sculpture was commissioned, but I know it was at the Science Museum at one point in Chicago. And then it was moved to this park, which is just a perfect location. For a number of years, I thought before I really looked closely at it, I thought that it was Hans Christian Andersen. I don't know why. He was holding a book, and it just felt like that, and I didn't initially recognize the Lincoln. But I look at this Lincoln as hopeful. So he's kind of, the other one is looking to the future. That's our future now. And he's also, in a way, well, he knows the past. This Lincoln is more optimistic. Let's go on. So I wanted to just put myself here so that you could get an idea of scale again. And to my right, or to your right, actually, is Jose Marti. And this was the last Jose Marti shaped piece that I did. And it's just before he goes off to battle. He's going to be killed in 3 days. He was an intellectual and an essayist, and I won't get into all of who he was. What he wasn't was a soldier. And he became the hero because he was fighting for Cuban independence from Spain. So he's about to get off, and I called him Valiant. Let's look at the next image. So here you can see some of the different pieces that I've included. To your left is a piece I call DC Capitol. It's a capital, not the Capitol. And I just really loved the images on it, and I tried to bring them to life. one thing I like to do when I'm working from sculpture is to open the eyes. Usually sculptures are kind of, the eyes are closed. And I like to open their eyes and bring them to life. I also like, when possible, working from sculptures, particularly if they're historic, because I feel like the sculptor is interpreting history, and I'm interpreting the interpretation, which is very much like history, which, that keeps changing. The image to the right of Jose Marti is the Fields clock, which many of you, at least those of you who are in the Chicago area, know. And I just wanted to, I had another name for it too, Time Flies. It's about time. There are all kinds of things to call it. And again, it's this literally an interest in time. And you can't see quite the detail on it, but on the front of the clock face, it's sort of scratched and fuzzy. And I love the image and the shape. So very often what I'm looking for are shapes. The one that you're only seeing part of on the left is a light fixture, a street lamp. And I thought I would do a series of street lamps. I've actually done only 2, and we'll see. I keep getting interested in these things. So the next slide, please. So now, in terms of the Evanston Arts Center, this wall is across from the wall you just looked at. And these are 2 pieces that are quite large. And they are a new approach. What I've done here, I guess you can tell, is that they're layered gator board. I'm working on gator board, which is a pretty light but very sturdy material that doesn't warp. And so these pieces are not absolutely flat. And one of the reasons I had thought about doing this for a while, and then at Space 900 we had a show called Tipping into Chaos, which is about the climate, the changing climate. And I did the piece that's on your left. It's called Climate Polka. And the piece, I thought the fragmentation of the parts would add to this concept of things sort of falling apart and coming together in different ways. Mostly fire and water, and a building floating on what would be a roof. That orange part I thought of as part of a building of a roof, but it's turning into fire. And as the piece comes together, there's nothing that is really horizontal or vertical, and that creates a lot more motion. The piece, and we're going to look at a detail of it, but the piece on your right is a new piece with some of the same ideas, and that one I've called Climate Mambo. A mambo is a little calmer of the dance than the polka, but still things are pretty crazy. And that one, there is the horizontal at the bottom, so there's some sort of grounding, but everything is really dancing off of that. Could we have the next image, please? So here's a closer up view of Climate Polka, and you can see some of the different parts and the layering of the paint. Let's go into the next image. So here we're zeroing in on where that sort of rooftop part of the building, the orange comes down, and it's just sort of balanced on that stick that projects. Stick is the wrong word, but whatever, piece of wood. Look at how they're really on two different levels. The orange is literally behind the yellow. And I like to play with this idea of illusion, the illusion that I create by making pieces that look three-dimensional. That's one kind of illusion. But here there's a reality that the piece is sort of three-dimensional, but I created the illusion that the orange goes on top of the yellow. Let's have the next slide, and you'll see what I mean. So when you walk around, it shifts. And whoops, what happened? There we go. Let's go on to the next image. And this is the close-up of Climate Mambo. And if you look at the yellow shape, the sort of door-like shape at the bottom, what I tried to do there, if you have distance, it looks like that door-like thing is going right through the panel underneath, the grass or whatever that is. But in fact, it sits on top. It also looks like the blue water that is going right through it. Let's have the next slide. And here you can kind of see the dimensionality of the real versus the illusion of the top of that door-like shape. And again, it's that same sort of play that I also did a little bit in the roof of this one. So the other thing is that I like to play a little bit with things that are kind of solid versus not, so that this piece from a distance also, the water almost looks like an animal besides looking like water, just a different kind of play. So now let's get to the next image. So there you just see this from another angle, and you can get an idea of the layering of the boards this way much more. So now let's go on to the next image. Oh, okay, this is sort of from the side, but I wanted you to see the shadow and the space between the building, which is also turning into fire. So the next image. So, and now this is another wall, and that whole wall, with the exception of the first piece that I'm going to talk about in a minute, are works on paper. And across from it, there are also a few works on paper in another installation. Let's take a look at that first piece up close. This is a piece I call Ancient Lion, and it's a very new piece. I became interested early on in architectural fragments. And what I found was these ancient pieces at museums. So this one, and which had a different ring to them. They're not necessarily, they're fragments of sculpture, they're fragments of the past. I'm not quite sure always what, but this is a lion that is in the Art Institute. If you saw it, you wouldn't recognize it. You wouldn't recognize this as the lion because it's, what is it, sandstone or something, it's all one color. But I love the shape, I love the tush. The rear end just was so sensual. And this is one thing that's happening in my work, is that I'm becoming much more organic. For a long time, my work, well, I always combined a certain amount of organic and architectural form. In this particular piece, I was just trying to make the piece look both heavy and float at the same time. So it's the color that does that. I wanted to give it volume and weight, but at the same time, make it look light. And I can't quite say exactly why that interests me, but it does. And maybe it's partly because there's an ambiguity in the that whole concept. But the colors just are, of course, what creates that illusion. Let's take a look now at some of the paper pieces. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. This is another one. This is a fragment of a Sphinx that's in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And again, one of the things that I was attracted to was the organic form, the beautiful organic form that I saw in the piece. And again, you probably wouldn't, you might recognize it if you went to the museum, but again, it's not yellow and all of these colors that I just enjoyed. So let's look at the next, now we'll look at some of the paper pieces. The first one on the wall is Dusab, founder of Chicago, and stumbled upon a fairly new sculpture of him that is on the north side of the bridge on Michigan Avenue. And I just, you can't see, but in the background there's a little scratching through even that indicates city. Went back over that bridge after creating this, and I was shocked to find that it's very tiny. I mean, for a statue, it just seems, I mean, a bust, it's fairly small, but very important. And that's why it's big here, I guess. Let's look at the next one. Oh, there he is, close up. I forgot that. I had this image. So one of the things I really enjoy doing with paper is not only working on a rectangular form, but using this is all acrylic on paper, and I can use the acrylic to be very watery, like watercolors, or I can build it up. And I enjoyed in this case building his face and then part of his tie and some other little areas, but contrasting it with the delicacy of a more watercolor, watercolors, even though it's acrylics. Let's take a look at the next one, which I think is Eleanor. It is. So, you know, to say that I only do 19th century heroes is kind of a mistake. Because I was doing this show, I felt that I really wanted to have a woman. I missed having a woman. And so I kept thinking about who, and Eleanor Roosevelt was so important, and so I decided to paint Eleanor. And there is a shape piece that we didn't take a picture of, but it is in the show standing by itself. And this one, I went through old photographs, old black and white photographs that are hardly holding together at all. And she just looked so kind and sweet in this picture, and not terribly frazzled. If you saw the piece in reality, one of the things I like to do on the surface is I take a palette knife with dry paint after I've layered it, and I put more paint on the surface, and it'll just come out in gentle little areas. So in this one, you see that process in her face and her hat and some of the boa around her neck. But I also was able to take a little of that technique and do it almost directly on the paper. So I just like the play of those materials. Let's go on to the next slide. And other heroes, most recent hero, Tony Fauci. So a lot of this work was done during the COVID period, And every day I would get on the radio early on and listen to our governor at 2:30 in the afternoon. And so I started painting these Fauci images, and he was always a little worried. The middle one, he's warning, and there is kind of an orange behind him, which is as close as I could actually get in my head to the actual orange that was standing behind him. But he's warning, and the one closest to us, again, he's just concerned but holding back. You have to admire the man. Can we have the next image? So, and here's the one. I wanted to get the tension in his fingertips, and he's really quite worried and this concerned, but holding back. So let's go on to the next slide. We're going to cross over kind of diagonally, and here's Abraham Lincoln. There are actually a number of Lincolns in the show. I'm not showing all of them, but there's Abe thinking, and that's Abe's hat floating above him. The museum and the Lincoln Museum in Springfield wanted to auction off a hat that supposedly had been Lincoln's, and this was a way that they were going to make some money for the institution. And I saw this wonderful hat in the Chicago Tribune, and I cut out the image and painted it from there. As it turned out, they couldn't authenticate the hat, so I don't think it ever happened. And on the bottom is an amphora. So again, another ancient piece. I like to mix these. I like to mix the time, different time periods. So let's have the next image. And so there is a close-up. I hope this shows, but underneath the paint, the first tones are all blue and blue-green. And then I've come over with reds and oranges and yellows and scratched through. So that's what you're seeing is this layering of the color. And then some of what I talked about earlier, that application with the dry palette knife. So let's look at the next image. There I am again. Since we couldn't do this live, I wanted to pretend that today I'm over at the Art Center. This way you can see the Lincoln and the hat. And then there are 3 other images that just other paper pieces in the show. And to your right are a series of small pieces that I've done, a lot of them, again, over COVID. There are a number of Lincolns, which I think I started before, a number of Lincolns in the show. Now, these small ones are just little piece paintings. Sometimes they work as sketches. Very often they're just complete in themselves. And for me, I've always made very large paintings, and I've never really been able to work small. The paper pieces are at least 30 by 20 inches. That's the smallest. And sometimes those little shapes would work, but I realized I was able to work small on those paintings because the image is large. You are close up to the image, and so that works for me. So we're going to end with looking at a few of these. The next slide. There's Anthony Fauci again. And again, this is just another way to work. The thing that's interesting, of course, when you're looking at screens is that what is little usually projects to be much larger, and what's larger looks small, so that those paintings that I did on the climate are really quite big. but there's lots of negative space around them. So to photograph them, you don't get the whole image. And here he's sort of almost hopeful in this one. That's how I look at this Fauci. You can get a good idea of the scratching in the process. And the next slide. There's Eleanor. Very loosely, and it's more of the Eleanor, I think. I love the sweet one, but she was very active and dealt with a lot in her life and a lot of change she wanted to. Very different view of Eleanor Roosevelt. And let's look at the next one. This one is called Party Abe. Now, you probably say, how on earth could you name it Party Abe? Well, I had done a number of Lincolns, and he always looked so sad. And so I decided this one was going to be different. This would be a happy Abe. He looked happier in the photograph than he did in other images, although I can't say he was really smiling. But, you know, he was going to be happy. Well, in the end, he looks... Because chances... So let's take a look at the last image, and then we'll see if there are any questions. And just to give you an idea again of there you can see winner. So I just want to thank you all for coming. And are there questions? I can't read questions on here, so I know Kara will relate them if there are some. Or if you just want to unmute, that's okay.
If anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, or you can also type it into the chat function as well, whichever is better.
Good God, no questions.
I have a question.
Hi, Ann, how are you?
Hi, Joanna.
It's good to see you.
Thank you, you too. Can you give us some idea of how much time you spend on, pick any, 1 or 2 or 3? I mean, is it days, weeks, hours, months? Give us a sense.
It's really hard to say because something like the climate ones, I thought about before I ever started drawing. And then I make some drawings, and very often with the larger ones, I make sketches out of acrylic. And I'm going to quickly get one. Can they see?
Sure. Yes, we can see.
Okay, so here was a sketch for the lion painting. And I actually did 2. Oh, there's the other one. The first one I didn't like. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to. So I played with how the scratching was. And so that probably took a couple of days, a few days to do. And then there's creating it. I'm getting help now in the building, thanks to Todd. That there's shaping and gluing, and then the painting. It can take the bigger pieces. One like the lion probably took about 3 weeks. The climate polka took probably closer to a month. Both of the both of the climate pieces, because they're a little bit more complicated. Sometimes it just sits for a long time. The little paintings I'm doing with the little portraits, they can take a week. They can take 3 days, never really less than that. When I say 3 days, I try to get about 4 hours in the studio. So That's actually all I can handle physically. Any other questions?
Hi, this is Jeannie.
Hi, Jeannie.
Hi.
You got a haircut since I saw you.
Oh, actually,
it's back. It's
long,
long.
long hair, not cut.
Hi, Eldon.
So thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. I've enjoyed
Thank
seeing your work and, even connecting with Fauci, it's like really being part of that whole scene, and I know how we absorb it. Two of my favorite pieces are your climate pieces.
I'm so glad.
With the
That makes me
polka
feel-
and, right, and the mambo, or mamba, or whatever. And I think the energy that I'm seeing in that, it's like, it reminds me of some of your earlier work, now combined with the newer, and I love the dimensionality of it. So what are you doing now? Are you doing more sketching for that? Did you do sketches to start with
guess-
that? And are you going to be building more forms? And
I do sketches. I don't know if Todd's looking for a sketch for me. I do a lot of sketches for those. And then in the case of those three-dimensional ones, this is a good example. Okay, so here is the sketch of the climate mambo. And this gives you an example that now this is after making a number of drawings and then deciding on the shape. And then I tested out about 3 of these for color. And this is the one that I came up with. Then made several Xeroxes to cut and paste. Cut and get an idea of where the 3 dimensions are. So all of that is part of the process. Am I going to continue that? That piece is the last one that I did. So, other than just a couple of little drawing things in the studio, that was the last piece. I'd love to do more of these. But they'll be mixed with other things because, it's back to the old problem of doing really great big paintings. What do you do with them and how you store them? So I'll just say Jean's known my work for a long time. She's a former member of Space 900. So anyway, thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, Joanna. I have one question about the same series of pictures, which I also enjoyed a lot. And when you were describing the process, I wasn't completely clear. Do you assemble the different layers of the board and then paint them, or paint them first and then put them together?
Assemble, so that I can work on the whole thing. It would be really hard, Manel, to do it the other way. This way, it's the only way I can see the whole thing. But they are kind of Velcroed to each other, and then ultimately to an armature that Todd built. That's a kind of amazing way of moving them more easily, or installing them, I should say, more easily. But they come apart, which is kind of nice because then I can store them. I can box them up. Otherwise, with the shape and everything, it's really difficult to store. But then as they go back, sometimes it's off a little bit and I have to touch up, and so there's flexible room within it. They do have to be painted all together. Yes, Barb. Hi.
Hi, Joanna, Barb Seifried, and
Yes.
I'm so glad to see you and your work. I'm in Arizona, so thanks to
are.
Zoom.
Wow.
Thanks to Zoom, I really get to, your work has really, I just wanted to say your work has really evolved. And my question to you is, what is your favorite part of the show?
What a horrible question. I'm sorry. No, it's a good question, but it's a tough one. It's a really tough one because on the one hand, the wall, that was a creation at the Art Center. I had some of that together in my studio where I played with some of the shapes, but every wall is different. So in a way, that's part of it. On the other hand, I really am excited about the two climate paintings and just love the opportunity to show those. So they're kind of a favorite too, and it's really between those two, I'd say.
Wonderful. Great to see your work because
See you.
I'm not there to see it and I won't be there so when it closes. So thank you. I'm glad we have Zoom.
I am too. We've got people here from California, New York, Arizona. So yes, Phyllis, you have to unmute.
Okay. Joanna, this is really such a pleasure to be able to do this sort of live and not so live. Color is, you talked a lot about color, obviously, color is a major part. And you talked at the beginning of your many trips to Cuba, from which you got certain intellectual ideas, but you must have gotten color. The color of the climate, the color of the buildings, and so on. How do you see that? Because you seem to have, at least in the works that you're doing now, there seem to be two ranges. And one is very cool and gray and blue and lavender. And then the other one is very bright. Could you say something about Joanna and color?
Oh boy. First of all, most of the buildings in Cuba are gray and falling apart. So I felt the music and the tone of the country and maybe the nature around it was vivid, but the paintings that I made, the architectural ones, didn't necessarily reflect the other reality. They reflected the emotional reality. So that is a big part. Somebody asked me at the show, whether about the climate paintings, because I could have made them really, really dark, and they're not. They're spirited, they're dancing, and it's partly because I'm basically optimistic. That's my internal color. You know, you have to paint who you are. But even though I think that this is a really crisis time that we're in, we get through it by ignoring, in part. And so that's part of this polka, this dance that is going on that can seem festive. Then there's but isn't in reality. And then there's also the idea of change, of how can I put it? Not just of destruction and rebirth. I mean, there's always that. You know, that there's a hope that as things seem sort of dark, something else will come out of it. And so that's it. And generally, I think I've gone through some periods where I've done really muted colors, mostly when I first started working with sand and gravel a long time ago. But generally, my color range is fairly vivid. But what makes color really vivid is if it's next to colors that aren't quite. So, you know, that's a whole other. Everybody has an internal palette, even if you don't make art. So,
Joanna, can you talk about whatever is behind you there? It looks like a gigantic moon and some, I don't know.
Okay, well, this is one of my shape paintings. I mean, canvases. It's a big piece on canvas, and it's actually from a water tower photograph that a couple of famous German photographers, the Beckers, took. They were black and white and teeny, very small pieces. And I decided to put the water on the outside of the water tank, and I liked a kind of feminine idea of the round part, and that it's also a moon and a outer space. So all of those things.
Hi, Joanna.
Yes, hi.
Hi, it's Ellen Gradman.
How are you? My God.
I know, it's so great to see your work.
Thank you.
Just so amazing and just such like leaps and bounds since the last time I saw it. where it was the very structural,
That
rectangular
was that
pieces.
long ago. Wow.
Yeah, and to see like these curves and round and like voluptuous pieces, it's just wow.
Thank
I was just
you.
wondering if you could talk about how your layering of color process, like how you go about doing that.
Yes, I'm just looking around to see if I have any way of showing you, and I don't quite, because I'm not in the middle of anything. I wonder if I pulled out the Lincoln a little bit. I'll just do this. Okay, so this is a big painting. And if you look at the background, it's a little bit like I do in the drawings, where it's thin. Then I put a red under him. There's red, there's purple, and very dark colors. And then I come in with yellow and take a screwdriver and scratch out, if that helps. And then there's little speckles on there. I don't know how much you can really see of that.
Right.
But that's just, I add that after and just kind of keep layering back and forth. Thanks.
That's awesome. It's beautiful. It's just all beautiful. And it's
Thank
so
you,
great to see
Ellen.
you.
It's really good to see you. I remember from so long ago.
I know, I know.
So, any other questions here? So, well, I want to thank everybody so much for coming today. It's really great to see people from all over, that people I love, and it's just good to see you, and some people that I don't know as well. Thank you very much for looking at my work. Hi,
Yes,
Judy.
Thank you, Joanna. And just so everyone knows, the exhibition is upstairs here in our second floor gallery at the Evanston Art Center. It'll be on display until, I believe, May 2nd. So if you're comfortable, please wear your mask, and there is a temperature that you would need to go through at the front of the building where you just get your temperature taken. And we welcome you all to come here and visit. We'll also be putting content online as well that you could see online. So thank you again for coming, and we hope to see you soon.